In the dusty, male-dominated world of a forward operating base, Captain Lena Vance's medical expertise was respected, but her combat instincts were dismissed as a peacetime fantasy. The seasoned sergeants had a tired, chuckling refrain: medics don't fight. They believed their weapons alone held the perimeter. But when chaos erupted from the Trilene one blood-red dusk, and the battle lines collapsed into a savage close-quarters brawl, it was the doctor, her hands slick with a soldier's blood, who would have to make a choice that defied every oath she'd ever taken. This is the story of how the healer became the hunter, and, in doing so, saved them all. The Afghan sun was a relentless, white-hot coin hammered into the sky, bleaching the color from the stone and sand of forward operating base, FOB Sentinel. Dust didn't settle here. It moved in slow, choking waves, coating everything in a fine, gritty film. In the medical tent, Captain Lena Vance worked with a quiet, methodical rhythm that contrasted sharply with the surrounding air of idle tension. Her hands, careful and precise, checked and rechecked her supplies: gauze, tourniquets, hemostatic agents for lines. Each item had its place. Order was her first defense against the chaos that lurked beyond the HESCO barriers. Outside, the base hummed with a different energy. The clatter of weapons being cleaned, the gruff banter of soldiers, the deep-throated rumble of idling vehicles. Lena was a known and respected figure, Doc Vance, but she existed in a specific understood box. She was the calm in the coming storm, the repair station, not part of the mechanism of war itself. This unspoken rule was most evident in her interactions with Master Sergeant Roy Grayson. Grayson was a wall of a man, a veteran of 3 tours, with a beard that seemed carved from granite and eyes that missed nothing. He respected Lena, truly. He'd seen her work under pressure, had seen her small hands stanch bleeding that seemed unstoppable. But his respect had a boundary. One afternoon, after a routine briefing, Lena had pointed to a spot on the map. "The convoy route here," she said, her voice even. "It funnels into a natural choke point. If I were setting an ambush, that's where I'd do it. We should have overwatch on that ridge, not just drive through." There was a beat of silence, then a few low chuckles from the junior NCOs. Grayson gave her a patient, almost paternal smile. "Doc, you patch us up better than anyone. But let's worry about the tactical picture, all right? Your job is after the fact. Medics don't fight. You save the fighters. That's how it works." The phrase hung in the air, not malicious but absolute. Medics don't fight. It was a mantra, a piece of the Army's DNA. Lena had heard it in training, heard it whispered behind her back when she aced her rifle qualifications, heard it in Grayson's tone now. She didn't argue. She simply nodded, the sun glinting off her captain's bars, and went back to her tent. But her eyes, a cool, assessing gray, lingered on the map for a long moment. Her past was her secret armor. Lena hadn't grown up in clinics. She'd been raised on a remote homestead in Montana by a survivalist father who believed in self-reliance above all else. By 10, she could field dress a deer. By 14, she could shoot a moving target at 200 yards. Medicine came later, a calling born from seeing a hunting accident turn tragic due to slow, ignorant care. She joined the Army to be a doctor, but the soldier part wasn't just an act. It was woven into her bones. Yet here, that part of her was seen as a quirk, a theoretical factoid, not a living skill. Days bled into weeks. The patrols went out, the convoys rolled, and the monotony of threat was punctuated by sporadic, distant gunfire. Lena treated heat stroke, a sprained ankle, a case of severe homesickness. The respect for her remained, but the subtle boundary held. She was invited to the cook fire, but not to the tactical huddles. She was essential, but peripheral. Then, the atmosphere began to shift. It was subtle at first, a local informant failing to show, an increase in stray animal carcasses near the wire, a known method of probing for mines, radio chatter going silent for a beat too long. The seasoned soldiers, Grayson included, felt it in their bones. The air grew thicker, the silence beyond the wire more profound, more listening. Lena felt it too, a prickling on her neck that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with the old lessons from the mountains. She quietly began adapting her med bay. She moved supplies to more defensible positions, ensured her critical gear was in mobile bags, and, yes, she cleaned her issued M4 rifle with a thoroughness that would have made any armorer proud. Private First Class Diaz, a young medic under her command, watched her one evening. "Doc, you expecting a war in here?" He joked nervously. "Expecting anything less is how you get people killed." "Diaz," she said, her voice low, not looking up from the weapon's spotless chamber. "A medic's first job is to not become a casualty. Remember that." The tension snapped on a Thursday. Intel suggested a high-value target was moving through the region. A platoon, plus Grayson's weapons squad and Lena's medical team, was ordered to a supporting position near a village called Calic. It was a show of force, presence patrol. The route out was uneventful, the village quiet, eyes watching from behind shuttered windows. The mission was dull, procedural. As they prepared to mount up and return to the FOB, the late afternoon sun casting long, distorted shadows, Grayson slapped the side of the armored vehicle. "See, Doc? Quiet as a church mouse. Sometimes the map is just a map." Lena didn't smile. She was looking past him at the tree line that edged the winding dirt road back to base. The birds had stopped singing. Her father's voice echoed in her head. When the woods go quiet, something is wrong. She opened her mouth to speak, but the first crack of gunfire tore the moment and the world apart. The ambush was not a few potshots. It was a violent, coordinated eruption of hell. The first RPG struck the lead vehicle, not destroying it, but blowing its tires and sealing the road. Instantly, heavy machine gun fire raked the convoy from the high ground on the left, pinning everyone down. From the right side tree line, a storm of rifle fire and more RPGs screamed. They were in a perfect kill zone, the very one Lena had vaguely feared and Grayson had dismissed. Chaos, raw and deafening, replaced order. The crack thump of incoming, the heavier BRRP of the American .50 calories returning fire, the shouts of contact left, contact right, mixed with screams of pain. Dust and smoke choked the air, laced with the sharp, metallic scent of cordite and blood. Lena's training took over, but it was a hybrid instinct, part doctor, part soldier. She didn't freeze. She hit the ground behind the wheel of her up-armored Humvee, her medical ruck already on her back. Diaz was next to her, his face pale, eyes wide. "Stay with me, Diaz. Breathe. We move to the casualties, not the other way around," she yelled over the din. Her eyes were scanning, triaging even before she moved. She saw a soldier from the lead vehicle stumbling, clutching his arm. A superficial wound. She saw another not moving behind a rock. Priority. "Grayson's trying to establish a perimeter," someone yelled. The return fire was intense, but disorganized, reacting to the enemy's initiative. The enemy fire was disciplined, methodical, hammering their positions. Lena and Diaz, low-crawling, reached the first critical casualty. It was Corporal Hendricks, his leg mangled by shrapnel, arterial blood pulsing ominously through his fingers. Lena was on him in seconds, her world narrowing to the wound. The battlefield noise faded into a muffled roar. Her hands were steady as she ripped open a tourniquet, applied a high on the thigh, cranked the windlass. The flow slowed, stopped. She packed the wound, injected morphine. Hendricks's pained screams subsided to whimpers. "Drag him behind that wreck," she ordered Diaz. As they pulled, rounds kicked up dirt at their feet. Someone in the tree line had seen them, was targeting the medics. A cold clarity washed over Lena. They were not just caregivers here, they were targets. They worked for what felt like hours, but were only minutes. A second soldier, Private Choi, took a round to the chest plate. It knocked the wind out of him, possibly cracked ribs, but he was breathing. A third had a nasty head laceration from falling. Lena patched, stabilized, directed movement. All the while, the American perimeter was shrinking. The enemy, using the dense cover, was beginning to flank. She caught glimpses of Grayson. He was a whirlwind of fury, firing, moving, barking orders, trying to rally a defensive position. But the enemy had the advantage, the ground, the surprise. A mortar round, crude but effective, landed 30 yards away, showering them with debris and shrapnel. Diaz cried out, a piece of hot metal slicing his forearm. Lena bandaged it swiftly. "Doc, we're getting pinned down. We can't evac the wounded." Grayson bellowed, sliding behind cover next to her, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His earlier confidence was gone, replaced by the grim reality of a commander watching his situation deteriorate. The radio on his shoulder crackled. The QRF, Quick Reaction Force, from the FOB was inbound, but was at least 20 minutes out. They didn't have 20 minutes. Lena finished securing Diaz's bandage and looked at Grayson, Then, at the tree lean where the most accurate fire seemed to originate, a nest, likely a PKM machine gun, was chewing apart their left flank. Every time a soldier tried to shift his support, that gun pinned them. "We need to suppress that machine gun position," she said, her voice eerily calm amidst the storm. "Nos cheat." Grayson snapped, popping up to fire a burst. "But every time we try, they've got it covered from another angle." Lena's gaze fell on her M4, propped against the Humvee tire next to her medical bag. The phrase echoed in her mind, not as a rebuke now, but as a tragic limitation. Medics don't fight. Her hands, stained with Hendrix's blood, were meant to save lives. But what if saving lives, right now, required something else? What if the oath to do no harm was fulfilled by causing harm to those who would cause more? A new sound cut through the battle, the agonized scream of a young private, Jenkins, who had tried to throw a grenade and been hit. He was lying in a slight depression, exposed, the machine gun fire stitching the ground around him. They were going to watch him die. Lena looked at her bloody hands. She looked at her rifle. She looked at Grayson, who was frantically trying to find a shot that didn't exist. The healer's calculus was complete. Someone had to fight. She reached for the rifle. Her hands, moments ago so delicate with bandages, now closed around the pistol grip and for into the M4 with a familiarity that surprised even her. The plastic and metal were cool, an alien object in the space recently occupied by gauze and shears. She flicked the selector switch to semi-automatic with her thumb, a motion as natural as breathing. Grayson saw her. "Vance, what are you?" His words were cut off by another burst of enemy fire. Lena didn't answer. She wasn't Doc Vance anymore. She was the girl from the Montana mountains, the one who understood wind, distance, and the patience of a predator. She shifted her position, moving a few feet to a better vantage point behind the shattered engine block of the disabled lead vehicle. It offered a narrow line of sight toward the tree lean. She ignored the chaos around her, the shouts, the explosions, the roar of the firefight. Her world tunneled. She saw the muzzle flash first, a consistent, flickering tongue of orange from the base of a gnarled pine tree about 180 yards away. The PKM. She noted the other, smaller flashes around it, the protectors. Her father's lessons whispered, "Find the source of the trouble, the head of the snake." She took a breath, let half of it out, and rested her cheek against the stock. The image of Jenkins, writhing in the dirt, burned in her mind. She pushed it down. Now there was only the front sight post, the target, and the physics of the bullet. She adjusted minutely for the slight uphill angle. The noise, the fear, the dust, it all fell away into a profound, deadly quiet. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. A single shot. At the tree lean, the PKM's sustained roar hiccuped, then fell silent for 3 long seconds before starting again, but, wildly off target, spraying into the sky before stopping completely. One of the smaller flashes near it stood up, confused. A second precise shot from Lena's position, and that figure crumpled. The effect on the left flank was immediate. The relentless pressure eased. A sergeant on that side, seizing the moment, yelled, "Now! Move!" And his team laid down a furious volume of fire, reclaiming a few precious yards of space. Grayson stared at Lena, his mouth slightly agape. She was already moving, not to celebrate, but to scan for the next threat. Her eyes, cold and analytical, found another concentrated area of fire from a rocky outcrop to the right. She fired 3 rounds in quick succession, not claiming a kill, but forcing the shooters to duck and disrupting their rhythm. "Vance, you," Grayson began, but there was no time for conversation. "Jenkins is still out there," she said, her voice flat, focused. "I can cover. You pull him." It was an order, not a suggestion. Grayson, the veteran master sergeant, found himself nodding to the captain medic. "On your signal." Lane provided more than a signal. She provided suppression. As Grayson and another soldier low-crawled toward the wounded private, she fired calculated shots at any muzzle flash that dared to orient toward them. She wasn't just shooting. She was dominating a slice of the battlefield, creating a bubble of relative safety through sheer, intimidating accuracy. The enemy, expecting volume, was unnerved by the precision. Shots meant for the rescuers went wide or ceased as shooters ducked. Jenkins was dragged to safety. Lena, seeing they were clear, shifted her aim and took out an insurgent who had broken cover to try and reposition with an RPG. It was a long, difficult shot. He fell. A new kind of energy began to spread through the American position. Word, passed in terse shouts and glances, was electric. Doc's sniping them. Doc's got a rifle. It wasn't just relief. It was a surge of raw, desperate hope. The medic had crossed a line, and in doing so, had drawn a new line in the sand for them to defend. Lena felt the shift, but didn't acknowledge it. There was no room for emotion. She was a system now. Identify threat, neutralize threat, protect the vulnerable. She moved between casualties, checking pulses, tightening tourniquets with one hand while her eyes constantly scanned the tree line, her rifle never far. She directed Diaz to keep pressure on a wound while she fired over the hood of the vehicle at a three-man team, trying to flank them. The enemy, sensing their momentum stalling, grew bolder. A group of 4 attempted a desperate rush from closer range, hoping to overrun the center. Lena, seeing the danger, switched her rifle to burst mode. She took a kneeling stance, exhaled, and engaged. 2 fell immediately. A third was cut down by Grayson's fire. The 4th retreated. For the first time since the ambush began, the Americans were not just defending. They were actively breaking the enemy's will. Lena's unexpected, lethal intervention had disrupted their plan, bought time, and given the embattled soldiers a chance to breathe, reorganize, and fight back as a unit. The distant, welcome thrum of approaching helicopter blades began to mix with the gunfire. The QRF was close. But the fight wasn't over. The enemy, wounded and desperate, would make one last push. The sound of the approaching helicopters was a lifeline, a promise of salvation that thickened the air with a new, urgent tension. The enemy heard it too. The sporadic gunfire from the trail lines condensed, grew more frantic. They knew their window was slamming shut. The final, desperate act of the ambush was about to begin. Lena felt it in the change of rhythm. The careful, aimed shots were replaced by long, undisciplined bursts, a classic tactic to pin defenders down for a final assault. A voice, guttural and shouting in Pashto, rallied from the center tree line. Shadows flitted between the trees, getting closer. They were massing for a close-quarters rush to overrun the convoy before the air support arrived. Grayson's voice boasted over the din, raw and commanding. "They're coming in. Fixe bayonets. Hold the line." It was a call from another era, a signal that this was about to become a knife fight. Lena's medical mind assessed the new threat vector. A close assault meant grenades, meant chaos, meant her casualties would multiply in seconds. The protective bubble her precision had created would pop. She couldn't let them get that close. She made a decision. "Diaz, with me. Grab your rifle, and all the mags you have." She slung her medical ruck over one shoulder, her M4 in her hands. She wasn't abandoning her post. She was moving it forward. Grayson saw her moving toward a slightly advanced, exposed boulder. "Vance, what the hell are you doing? Get back. Suppressing them at distance isn't working anymore," she shouted back, her voice leaving no room for debate. "We have to break their charge before it starts. Cover me." She didn't wait. With Diaz terrified but trusting, following, she sprinted the short, exposed distance to the boulder. Rounds zipped past, kicking up spurts of dirt. They dove behind it. The position was risky, but it gave her a clearer field of fire into the approach path from the main tree line. From here, the war was intimate. She could see the fabric of their clothes, the glint of their eyes. The approaching group was a mix of seasoned fighters and younger, zealot-filled boys. They were maybe 80 yards out and gathering for the push. Lena switched her rifle to full auto. This was not about precision now. It was about volume and shock. "Diaz, on my mark, pour fire into that group. Don't stop." She took a grenade from her own webbing. She hadn't carried it for this. She'd carried it as a last-ditch defensive tool for her aid station. Now, it was an offensive weapon. She pulled the pin, let the spoon fly, judged the distance with a calm that bordered on the surreal, and threw. The grenade sailed in a high arc, landing not in the center of the group, but just ahead of them. They instinctively scattered, their formation breaking. "Now," she yelled. She and Diaz rose together, bracing against the boulder, and opened fire. A storm of bullets swept into the confused insurgents. Lena's burst took down 2. Diaz, fueled by adrenaline, fired with a yell. The charge faltered, stumbling into cover or falling. The momentum was shattered. But one fighter, enraged and determined, broke from the side with an RPG launcher on his shoulder. He was aiming not at the soldiers, but at the cluster of wounded behind the vehicles. Lena saw him. There was no time for a careful shot. She shoved Diaz down, stood fully exposed, and fired her entire remaining magazine on automatic, walking the tracers directly into the man. He staggered, the RPG tube dropping from his shoulder and firing harmlessly into the ground, the backblast illuminating the scene in a sudden, hellish flash. In that light, Lena was silhouetted, a figure with a medic's bag on her back, a rifle in her hands, smoke curling from the barrel. It was an image that would etch itself into the memory of every soldier present. The psychological impact was final. The enemy's will to fight dissolved. The ragged survivors began to withdraw into the deepening twilight, dragging their dead and wounded. The incoming fire reduced to a few last, defiant potshots. Then the QRF arrived. Attack helicopters roared overhead, their miniguns shredding the retreat paths. Troops fast roped down, securing the perimeter with professional efficiency. Suddenly, the space was filled with shouts of "clear" and the blessed sight of fresh, armored troops. The immediate danger was over. The silence that followed, ringing and heavy, was almost more deafening than the battle. Lena lowered her rifle. The system that had taken over, the hunter from the mountains, began to recede. In its place came a wave of physical and emotional exhaustion so profound her knees trembled. The sounds of the wounded, which she had blocked out, now flooded back. The moans, the cries for help. She turned her back on the tree lean, on the weapon of war, and walked toward the casualties. Her hands, now smeared with gunpowder residue and blood, went first to her medical ruck. The transition was seamless. One moment she was a warrior, the next she was kneeling beside a young soldier, her voice soft, saying, "You're okay, son. Look at me. You're going to be okay. Let me see that wound." Grayson watched her, a complex storm of emotions on his smoke-streaked face. Shame, awe, gratitude, and a deep, humbling respect. He walked over, his own weapon slack. He didn't know what to say. "Doc, Lena, She looked up from her work, her gray eyes meeting his. There was no accusation there, no triumph. Just a profound fatigue of someone who has done what was necessary. "Master Sergeant," she said, her voice hoarse, "I need more field dressings. And tell the birds we have 4 urgent surgicals." The fight was over. The healing had begun. The aftermath was a blur of noise, dust, and urgent motion. Black Hawk medevac helicopters thundered in, their downdraft whipping the bloody dust into furious spirals. Lena moved among the wounded with a ghost's quiet efficiency, her earlier ferocity completely banked. She directed loading priorities, gave crisp handoff reports to the flight medics. Her voice steady even as her hands, now scrubbed clean but forever marked, gently adjusted in 4-line or checked a bandage. Grayson stood like a sentinel, orchestrating the security perimeter and the recovery of gear, but his eyes kept finding her. Each time she knelt in the dirt, her focus absolute on the soldier before her, the image of her standing exposed, cutting down the RPG gunner, superimposed itself in his mind. The two Lenas, the healer and the protector, had merged into one undeniable, formidable truth. The old mantra, "Medics don't fight," died in the Afghan dust that day, killed by the very hands that now work to save lives. Back at FOB Sentinel, the formalities of war took over. The dead were honored. The wounded were flown to a larger hospital. The intelligence teams dissected the ambush site. And through the rumor mill of the base, the story spread, growing with each telling. It wasn't just a story about a medic who shot back. It was about Doc Vance, who had single-handedly broken an enemy assault, who had fought with the cold skill of a sniper, and then immediately turned to stitching up the wounded. She became a legend in under 24 hours. Lena wanted none of it. She retreated to her medical tent, finding solace in the sterility, the order of supplies, the tangible work of inventory and repair. The weight of what she had done settled on her not as pride, but as a solemn, heavy burden. She had taken lives. She had violated the core tenet of her medical identity to uphold its ultimate purpose, preservation of life. It was a paradox that would haunt her, a quiet ghost in the back of her eyes. Grayson found her there late the next evening. The base was quiet, the only sound the hum of generators. He stood at the entrance of the tent, his bulk filling the space. He carried 2 cups of strong, bitter coffee. "Captain," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Master Sergeant," she acknowledged. Not looking up from a bandage she was re-rolling. He stepped in, placing a cup near her. I, I owe you an apology. And, more than that, I owe you the lives of my men. Mine included. Lena finally looked at him. She saw no mockery, no patronizing patience. Only raw, unvarnished respect. You don't owe me anything, Roy. We all did our jobs. See, that's the thing, he said, leaning against the supply crate. I thought I knew what your job was. I was wrong. Dead wrong. You weren't just doing a job back there. You did the job. The one that needed doing. He took a long sip. That shot on the PKM gunner, that was 200 yards uphill under fire. That wasn't luck. Lena was silent, her fingers pausing on the bandage. I read your file after everything, Grayson admitted. Montana. Survivalist background. Expert reflexual. I should have seen it. I should have used it. Instead, I put you in a box. Medic. And I left a weapon on the shelf when we needed it most. That was my failure as a leader. His honesty disarmed her. The wall she'd built around herself softened a fraction. The box exists for a reason, Master Sergeant. The Geneva Convention, our ethics, they're there to protect everyone. I crossed the line. You held the line, he corrected firmly. When it was crumbling, you held it. You didn't cross it, you expanded it. You showed us that a medic's duty isn't just to patch up the consequences of a fight. It's to do whatever it takes to ensure the fight ends with as many of us alive as possible, even if that means fighting. He stood up straight, a formal posture returning. From now on, in this unit, your tactical input is requested, expected, and, if you're willing, I'd like you to run a few classes. Not on first aid, on fieldcraft, observation, maybe even some advanced marksmanship principles for the medics. Teach them how to not just be victims on the battlefield. This was the real change, the permanent shift. It wasn't just about respect for her. It was about redefining a role for everyone. Lena considered it, the weight of the offer settling alongside the weight of her actions. She nodded slowly. I can do that. The final validation came weeks later, during a ceremony. A general had flown in to award medals for the action at Calic. Lena was awarded the Bronze Star with Valor. The citation read, for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. Captain Vance's decisive and courageous actions under intense fire directly saved the lives of 15 members of her unit. As the medal was pinned to her uniform, Lena's gaze swept over the formation. She saw Diaz standing taller. She saw the other medics, their chins up, looking at her not as an anomaly, but as a standard. She saw Grayson, who gave her a slow, firm nod. Later, walking back to the med tent, a young private she treated for a sprain called out, "Hey, Doc." She turned. He gave her a grin. "Nice shooting, ma'am." She offered a small, tired smile in return. The journey was far from over. The memories, the ghosts, the moral reckoning, they would all require tending, a different kind of healing. But here, in the dust and reality of war, a new understanding had been forged. They would never mock her or any medic again. They had learned, in the most brutal way possible, that sometimes the surest hands to heal are also the steadiest hands to hold a rifle. And that true strength lies not in clinging to a single role, but in having the courage to become what the moment demands. Lena Vance, the healer, the hunter, the soldier, walked on, her shadow long and singular in the setting sun.